So any comments or questions or anything from the students? This week we have a new assignment where you're watching a Great Courses video. I believe, have Joseph Campbell again this week, and this assignment, and then fire and water discussion. So, and then you're reading the Ramayana too, which is due, I want to say next week or the week, probably the week after. So that's kind of needs to be on your radar as well. So does anybody have any questions about the course, where we're at in the course, what we're doing, why we're doing it, who's doing it, anything of general interest or nature?
Oh, I actually have a question about one of the assignments.
Okay.
I sent you an email earlier today. I can't log into the Sierra database, so I don't know how to watch the video you have linked for the 4.4 assignment.
Your my Sierra credentials.
Okay.
Your student, your username, and then whatever password you use to get into just any part of the Sierra system, your My Sierra account.
All right. I think I tried that earlier, but I can try it again.
Yeah, try it again.
All right.
That's how you do it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Oh, looks like a full roster here, which is great. Hi, Kim.
Hi. For the Joseph Campbell interview assignment for this week, are we writing a review response like we did last time, or is it just?
I think there's a quiz. I think there's a quiz on that one. Is that? I have to go back and look at it. But I think it's a quiz this week, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at the study guide and whatnot, I just wanted to be sure that we weren't writing a response like last time or not. So.
Yeah, it's a quiz this time. So.
Okay.
If my memory serves me, I'd have to go back and look. I finished.
Yeah, it's a quiz.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. Other questions of a general nature?
I had a really quick question.
Uh-huh.
So I was wondering, I know that you title each assignment point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. On my end, it shows that I have 2 separate assignments listed for 4.4. There's one, Tales of Flood and Fire, and 2, a podcast review. Which of the 2 are we meant to do? Are we supposed to do both?
Well, so I'm having a tough time with this particular class this semester because I'm redoing parts of it along the way, but the parts that are old are also staying in there. And so on your end, it may look like there's 2 things. So I have to go back in and change some settings and things. And this happened last week too. So it's a problem on my end. But basically what you're doing is you're watching the Great Courses one, and the other one I will go ahead and figure out why that's still showing up on your end, and hopefully get it figured out for the rest of the semester so it doesn't remain confusing for you. But again, that's a problem on my end, and I'll work on it, tonight. So
yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. Good. Okay. Anything else? All right. So we're talking about fire and water in world mythology, and there's, as you I'm sure are aware, a whole bunch of different stories having to do with both fire and water. I'm curious to hear what rabbit hole you went down, Sam.
Well, it's fire and water, so that got me thinking about the elements, like the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. And I wanted to look at some stories about that, and to I kind of went through a rabbit hole where I read some stories where I compared Greek and Indian elements, and I started seeing how different cultures around the world had these kinds of ideas. And then I started reading the Indian myths. So I actually just kind of want to read some of the myth, tell a story.
Yeah.
About how fire arose, or it's great. It's Indian, so it's going to be the Vedic culture, and it's going to tie into the Ramayana a little bit, at least.
Sure. For sure.
Like this kind of, when you read it, now you'll understand what those people are doing in the book.
Excellent.
This is the religion behind it, and it's all about fire and also water, because it's like every story about fire involves water. Every story about the ocean that has the sun. Or the moon and the sun, and it's and you usually also have the earth and the sky, or the earth and air.
Yeah.
So do you want me to start reading the story? I'll give a little
Yeah,
background on it. And
Sure, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm actually going to kind of just read because from a little, like just a little excerpt from an Upanishad, or it's actually, it's not an Upanishad. It's a what's it called? From the Vedas. The Rig
Vedic,
Veda.
yeah.
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 So and this is it's the creation myth that would be known by the name of Purusha, or Purusha, and then it became what's the other name?
Oh yeah.
Panjapati.
Yeah.
Panjapati is the creator. So there's the same thing. So it's the myth of Panjapati, or the creator. So this is an Indian Vedic creation myth, told within a specific culture that lives and has been in the subcontinent of India. And so I'll read about it. It's a creation myth. In the beginning, the universe was soul, or Atman, in the form of an androgyne, a person. The word for that is Purusha. He looked around and saw nothing other than himself. Then at first he said, I am, and thus the word I was born. Therefore, even now, when one is addressed, he first says, it is I, and then speaks about whatever he has to say. Since he, preceding all this universe, burned up all evils, he is Purusha. He who knows this burns up anyone who would precede him. Okay. Purusha was afraid, therefore one who is all alone is afraid.
Yeah.
He reflected, since there is nothing other than me, of what am I afraid? Then his fear vanished. For of what could he have been afraid? The first cognitive behavioral therapy taking place in the creation of the universe.
Yeah.
One becomes afraid of a second, but he did not rejoice. Therefore, one who is all alone does not rejoice. He desired a second. He was of the same size and kind as of a man and a woman closely embracing. He caused himself to fall apart into two pieces, and from him a husband and a wife, Pati and Patni, were born. Therefore, Vajnavalkya has said, oneself is like a half fragment. Therefore, this space was filled by a woman. He united with her, and from this, mankind was born. Okay. I'll shorten this. She reflected, how can he unite with me after engendering me from himself? For shame, I will conceal myself. So she became a cow and he became a bull and united with her, and cattle were born. And she became a mare and he became a stallion, and so on. Thus he created all the pairs, even down to the ants. He knew that he was creation, for he created all of this. Thus creation arose. For whoever knows this is born in that creation of his. Then he churned from his mouth as the fire hole, Yoni, the name for mouth is fire hole. And from this 2 hands he created fire. Therefore, both mouth and hands are without hair on the inside. For the fire hole is without hair on the inside. Fire hole.
That's true.
When people speak of him saying, sacrifice to this God, speaking of one single God and then of another single God, it is his own creation, and he himself is all the gods. Now, whatever is moist, he created from semen, and that is soma. All this universe is food and the eater of the food. For soma is food, and Agni, fire god, is the eater of food. This was the surpassing creation of Brahma, for he created the gods who were better than him when he, being mortal, created immortals. Therefore, it was a surpassing creation. Whoever knows this is born in that surpassing creation of his. Okay, there's a whole lot there.
Yeah. So what do you make out of that?
Okay, so if we want to talk about fire and water, this is the Vedic Hindu creation story of a person, of a humanoid, an androgen. It would be, you would say in Greek, it would be anthropos, which just means like humanoid.
So
basically.
let me so for the students, the Vedic period of Hinduism is roughly from about 1500 BC to about 500 BC. It's the earliest form of Hinduism, and it's centered on sacrificial rituals and a kind of a priesthood. And our earliest knowledge of Hinduism comes from the Vedic period. So what Sam is telling is a very, very early Hindu story. So I just wanted to let the students know about that part of it.
And that culture kind of came down from the central steppes through Iran into there. And there's also native older cultures that I actually want to talk about. It's really interesting. In fact, the ancestors of the Australian Aborigines still today have a culture and an area in India, and they're related.
South, at the very bottom in the south.
Yes, and it's an old culture, and they're still to this day a community. It's really cool. Anyway, but so there are lots of communities in the subcontinent of India, but this is one that came down and mixed with the other peoples that created religion. Anyway, so but what we hear about the creation, that this is the universe. It's the creation of mind. It's the creation of thought. It's the creation of fear. Of all of the, it explains sort of like in Genesis how it explained like how the animals were made and named. It explained where everything came from, and it explained how it is essentially this person created the universe out of himself, out of itself, and it is, this story becomes the basis for Vedic religion, and then Indian society and culture. And this is the thing that I didn't really quite seem tied together until I looked up fire. And fire ties everything together.
Oh wow, that's really
cool.
interesting.
So
yeah.
The creation of fire, Vedic religion works like this. You believe in the myth I just told you, number one. So that's your worldview. That's how you believe in that myth. So what happened is the world was created out of kind of this sacrifice, out of the creation, out of this person. And then it talks about soma, and it talks about fire, and it talks about life and death in that creation myth at the end. And so now what humans have to do is they have to, by sacrificing, by using fire and using soma and recreating sort of the heavens on the earth, they keep this sphere alive, dependent upon it, like, okay, and it works like this. So there are the three fires, right? So these are even the caste systems based upon this. So you have the Brahmins, the priests, the warriors, and the producers, and then the servants or the untouchables, right? And the three fires are this. From heaven, you have the mouth, right, of God, and that creates the priest, which is the head. And from the priest, they have the offering fire to the heavens. So they propitiate the heavens. And then the middle of the body are the warriors, and they have the defensive fire. Okay, so they take, and that's the mid space of the body. And then the thighs or the feet are the producers, and they have the cooking fire, and that's earth. So heaven, mid space, and earth, and then there's the untouchables. Those are the feet, so they don't even include them. Okay, and the fire, there really are three different fires actually. So there is a fire in the temple, a holy flame that is in the temple, a holy flame and a holy hearth in every temple, and it's in Zoroastrian religion. It's even in It's in Greek as well.
In Roman.
and Greek and Roman. So every time every home was built around a hearth or a Hestia. Hestia is the Greek goddess of the hearth, and that the head of the family, the paterfamilias, the head of every family was the head priest of the family, and they had all these different gods, and they would have to keep the fire alive and propitiate these different gods that would, had different aspects of sort of like domestic life and family life, and like you would imagine ancestor worship and stuff like that. And a very similar thing, the priest would take care of the gods, and then the person at home had their own fire, where they would, just like what I talked about with the Greek household. And then literally the producers, that's a whole nother sphere of life. Ajax, no. Sorry.
For any of you familiar with Homer, Sam named his dog Ajax, so it's one of the characters in the Iliad. So,
but anyway, so you talk about fire, and you get to see a creation myth in Indian Vedic religion, and that creation myth is a basis of a sacrificial religion, which uses fire as a means to burn soma. Soma is like the energy from the moon. It is a word for the moon. And I really got bummed out that I missed the moon lecture, because Chandra and Soma and Chandi are all names for the moon, and Soma is interchangeable with the moon, and Soma is this, so food and elixir, and it's in the lunar sphere, right? But it's the closest one to the earth, and fire allows you to burn Soma in order to reach the gods and reach these transcendental states and all this stuff. It's really cool.
So the culture that came down that you were talking about into India, we call those the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and they some of them went down into India and settled there. Some went to Iran and settled there. Some went to Greece and Rome and settled there. And so this culture from Ukraine, modern day Ukraine, really is where it began, and it domesticated the horse and the wheel, and cattle, yeah. And it, because they had domesticated horses, and because they were archers, they could shoot bows and arrows from the saddle, they overran everywhere they went. And they were a very powerful warrior clan. And some of them, and I think what we can tell is that fire, I don't want to say they were fire worshipers, but fire was absolutely central to their way of life.
Right. It's the sacrificial flame is really central in almost all cults. It is the way you would sacrifice anything to the gods in Greece. It's the same way. You would kill the animal, or similar way, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah. So there's the story in Greece. It's a story of Prometheus, and what happened is, and we talked about this a little bit before, but there was the first generation of gods, and they gave rise to the Titans, and then the Titans gave rise to the Olympians, which was the next generation of gods. And the Titans and the Olympians fought, and that was a story where Atlas, was punished by having to hold up the sky, and his daughters became the hard handmaidens of Artemis. But one of the Titans was Prometheus, and Prometheus stayed out of the fighting, so he didn't get punished when Zeus and the Olympians won. And Zeus won because he had the thunderbolt, right? The sky fire. When the Olympians won, since Prometheus didn't fight, he wasn't punished. And so he was kind of allowed to kind of, wander around and whatever, just kind of be free. And he was given the task of creating humans. And so he did, and he loved humans. And he loved them more than the Olympian gods. I mean, the Olympian gods had imprisoned all of his brothers and sisters in the underworld. And so he didn't like Zeus or Hera or any of them, but he really loved humans, and he taught them all of the aspects of civilization. He taught them arts and crafts, and how to use fire, and how to make sacrifices, and all of these skills that people needed to be people. And it was only men at that time. Women weren't around yet. This is kind of a little bit like your story where it's a man, but he has to sort of create women out of himself or whatever, Eve from the rib or whatever sort of thing. But anyways, the story goes that that Prometheus taught human beings how to sacrifice, how to use fire to kill an animal and then cook it. And he had to offer the first fruits of the sacrifice to Zeus, because Zeus was the king of the gods, and the king of the gods needed to have the first fruits of the sacrifice. But he tricked Zeus. What he did is they butchered a cow or whatever, and he took all of the steaks and the meat and the prime cuts of meat, and he stuffed it all into the intestines and the stomach, which is just this nasty purple whatever blob. And he made that into a like one side of the offering. And then he took all of the shit, he took all of the bones and the gristle and the anus and whatever, everything else, and he put that into another bundle, and he covered it with all of this greasy bacon fat. And then he went up to Zeus and he's like, which one do you want? You're allowed to have the first choice. And Zeus smelled all of the, the aromatic fat, and was like, I will choose that. And so that's why ever since, the gods have eaten all the crap from the animals, where the humans, when they sacrifice, they get all the meat and all the good things. And this is a story that explains why when men sacrifice, they get the good stuff and the gods get the junk from the animal. So Zeus, after he found out that he had been tricked, was pissed, really, really mad. And so he stole fire from the humans so that they would freeze to death and become, super, super cold. And Prometheus again took the side of the people, and he stole fire. And he stole fire from Zeus and brought it back down to people. And again, that was like the final straw for Zeus. And he strapped Prometheus to a mountain in the Caucasus range and had an eagle come eat his liver out every night, and every day it would grow back and the eagle would come, and it was this excruciating punishment. And to punish the people, he made women. This is the Greek story.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, Pandora. He created the first woman, Pandora, who was just like the worst thing that ever happened to man. And he
According to one disgruntled poet.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, he was an unhappy dude.
Yeah.
But that story too, it really revolves around fire. The beginning and the middle and the end all revolve around fire.
And can we point out though, as well, like I think Jason, I've heard you talk about this, that fire making was second to fire cultivation and fire.
Oh yeah.
So human beings would go and find a fire.
Yeah.
And that's why that's why when you said in that myth, they stole the fire. What are you talking about? We didn't steal the fire.
Right.
Because back then, when you lost that sacred hearth ember, you never let the fire die.
Yeah.
Your Hestia is the goddess of your home. It's your hearth. And it's a sacred fire, and that's the fire of your family and your community and everything, and you never let it die. This is also the same thing in Vedic religion and in Zoroastrian, Persian religion, and because it kind of comes from a similar background, right? It's say in the year 2000 BC.
Yeah,
they're all kind of hanging out together in a similar culture. Perhaps.
For this, we have to go way back. So we'll step way back into evolutionary history, and like 200,000 years ago in Africa. And the question is, how did people get fire? And nobody knows. I mean, nobody was around back then, but it seems pretty clear that people didn't do like Tom Hanks in Castaway or whatever, if you've seen that movie, where they didn't figure out how to make it. There was probably a lightning strike somewhere or some lava from a volcanic eruption.
Well, the Serengeti's always on fire. It's part of the natural environment. I watched a documentary, I'm not smart. The ecosystem of certain, like the Serengeti in Africa, involves the constant burning of the grass. And if the grass doesn't burn, it won't the process won't continue, the seeds won't grow and nothing. Like, so if
Right.
you put the fires out, you destroy the ecosystem. So there's always fire in certain parts of Africa, even today, always. And
So
it's
what
really-
our
yeah.
what our Homo sapiens sapiens ancestors did, we think, is they went out to one of those fires and they stuck a branch in it and caught the branch on fire, because it's not really threatening, right? If it's kind of dying down in its embers, you can go out there and play with it or whatever. And they took one of these branches and they realized that if you fed it, you could keep it going. So they took one of these branches, they think, back to a cave, because caves are inoculated from wind and rain. And so in a cave,
It's
you
always
would-
like 62 degrees as soon as you're like 6 feet underground.
yeah. And you could keep bringing wood in to feed the fire and keep it smoldering. And from that original place, human beings could take embers out and carry it to make a campfire. And there's all kinds of clever ways that people have concocted to carry embers from one place to another. But the hearth fire, the central fire, if that went out, you'd have to wait until another lightning strike or something. It would be a real problem. But our earliest ancestors didn't master fire by creating it with their own skills. They cultivated it. They gathered it and cultivated it and kept it going. And when they did that, it allowed us to cook our meat. And when we can cook meat and
Vegetables
meat
and
and vegetables and
yeah,
things,
and water.
it gives this huge caloric boost to our diet, which helped our prefrontal cortex form. I mean, this is like how our brains came to be rational, is through the process of our early ancestors cultivating fire and then eating the food that's cooked off of that fire.
The Neanderthals had this technology.
Neanderthals did.
170,000
Homo
years
erectus
ago,
too,
something
I
like that.
think, yeah.
So
So this whole business of carrying fire continued on down into recent times. There was a mummy that was found, and then I'll let you I'm talking too much. I'm going to
no, man.
stop talking here in a second.
It's
But there was a mummy that was found from 30,000 years ago in the Alps. His name was Etzi. They named him. I don't know why. But this guy Etzi had a what's called tinder fungus. It's a certain type of highly flammable fungus, and when you kind of broke it apart and you napped it, you rubbed two stones, you created a spark out of two stones, the tinder fungus would catch, and then you could feed it and it would grow into an ember. But Etsy also had this little container that had coals in it. So it wasn't like every time they wanted to fight a fire, they made that. It was really precious, the resources. The tinder fungus was, and the flint and the stones to make the spark was. And so once you had an ember, you really kind of carried it around. And even in the Prometheus myth, it says that Prometheus brought the fire down from Olympus to the humans, carried in a fennel stalk, which is a plant. And there's actually evidence of people carrying fire in fennel stalks in historical times. So this is a really important distinction in thinking about the evolutionary history of fire, that for most of our ancestors, they had a central fire and they kept it going.
Think about how sacred and special that would be.
Yeah.
If you were really good at keeping it going, but you didn't really know how to
Get it started.
Get started again. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was
That
the
would-
woman's job to keep it going. And in a lot of these cultures, it was women.
Yeah.
The Vestal virgins in Rome were associated with keeping the eternal fire of Rome.
Hestia is a goddess.
And Hestia, the hearth goddess of
Yeah.
Greece, is that.
I think she's my favorite.
I know. And there's no stories about her. She didn't cheat on anybody. She didn't fight. And she just stayed at home quietly next to her hearth and was the source of all civilization.
Doing good. So have you heard, and if you have, I haven't really, I just know a reference, the Australian Aboriginal story about what is it? The fire was spread by an ascetic wandering around with a torch.
No.
Have you heard that myth?
No.
Oh, okay. So I didn't get to look it up before I started the class. That's wanted to see.
Oh, okay.
A
All
lot
right.
of the stories. but I read reference to it essentially like inferring from the smart guy.
Yeah.
The Aboriginals' story of how fire basically was spread is that like in ancient times, like a primordial ascetic had like a fennel
An
stalk,
aesthetic would be like a shaman or
like
something
a
like that.
shaman who was wandering through the Australian outback, a wanderer, right? Who's going out carrying something like a fiery torch like Prometheus, right? So they call it like the torch, and that's the sun, right? So it's the torch of the sun. And so, but that's also, it's in that story is in some of the versions of the story that I told.
Yeah.
That's how fire was created. That there's a different version where a wandering, and it's just sort of like weirdly inserted, and they think that it's this guy thinks that it's an influence from the original Aboriginal ancestors that told the same stories that still live in India today, and they think
The
that
Dravidian.
the Dravidian community.
People, yeah. Does anybody here in the class have a story that connects to any of the things that Sam and I were talking about? Give people a chance if they have a story that they want to share. There were a lot of comments last time that everybody really appreciated the students who told stories, and they said it really was great to hear their classmates tell stories. So I mean, I want to welcome those if there are any. It's funny, but well, it is really the cultivation of fire is, either the most important thing that happened to the human species with agriculture, or the second most. I mean, I don't know, one of the two, but it's just you can't possibly overestimate how important that was. The Khoisan people of South Central Africa, who are genetically the most ancient lineage on the planet, they told a story that in the beginning everything was underground, and the people and the animals and the plants could all talk to each other, and all life was down there. And then the Creator made a hole in the ground, planted a tree, and through that roots and hole of that tree, the people could come up, and the birds flew up the tree and out the branches and into the air, and the people followed, and the people came up. And Creator at that time told the people not to make any fire, and if they didn't make fire, they could still talk to the animals and commune with, like communicate with animals in nature. And then he went away, and it got dark and cold, and one of the people was like, let's make a fire, and they forgot what the Creator had told them. And so they did. And when they made that fire, all the animals became afraid of them, and they could no longer communicate with them anymore. And so it was fire that severed our relationship with the animal world. But then we just cooked them and ate them, and we like saying it's like hamburgers. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But all the vegetarians are like, no, that's a bad thing.
Well, it is symbolic, right? Sort of
Yeah.
human culture,
Yeah.
moving one step away from animal sort of existence to what we have today,
There's a really neat ritual in the Zoroastrian tradition. You had talked a couple times about Zoroastrian and their fire veneration. The hearth fire is super central to them too. And when they were a kingdom, the kingdom of Cyrus and Darius, the Persian Empire, the great mighty Persian Empire that fought the Greeks and everything, they came up with this ritual. And the ritual was they sent out the head king, or what do they call the Persian king? The Shaman.
Shah, King of
Shaman.
Kings.
King would send out messengers to every part of the realm, and they would get fire from every occupation, bakers and miners and farmers. They would get fire from the hearths of all of the different kinds of occupations. And they would also get fire from the funeral pyres for people who were the burning of the dead. They would collect embers from those fires, and they would collect fires from lightning strikes. And they would bring all of these fires, and they would feed Hey, there's a baby. That's a little baby. Hi, Eleanor. Say hi. You're famous. Oh my goodness. Wow.
That's what I spend my time
Yeah,
doing most of the time.
that's your
Laura, Mother Earth is going to take the spirit child and
it's
vicious
hard to
dog on a walk.
it's hard to understand how something as ugly as you created something as pretty as that, or even had a part in
Well, coming from you, I understand.
it.
I understand why you would feel that way.
Oh my gosh, that is just so cute. His little fire hole. um, but anyway, so they'd collect all these fires and they would bring them back to the central fire in what Persepolis or whatever. And that was the fire that contained the hearth fires from all over the empire. It was a unifying fire. And not only from all over the empire, but also from the ancestors through the funeral fires and the sky itself. So it connected all the people with all their ancestors, and all of nature were collected into this one, central fire.
Yeah, it really is. The fire is a unifying principle throughout these cultures. Is just really interesting, and even within the Bible, if you describe how sacrifices were made during the temple periods of Judaism, the animals were slaughtered according to specific rituals, but ultimately they were burned in almost the same way as the Greeks burned thighs with fat. I mean, it's very similar.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to say it's the same. It's its own tradition.
Yeah.
But when the Greeks and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Persians and the Vedic Indians all looked at what each other were doing, they would understand it.
Yep.
They would go, yes, okay, I get that.
We do something like that too.
Yeah, like, oh, you bury your dead. Okay, I get, yeah, that makes sense, because of course, like,
One other little, I just found this out, and I thought you would appreciate this, Sam. But there's a term in France called couvre-feu, and this is a term for covering up the hearth fire. When you go to bed at night, you've got a hearth fire, and this goes back to the medieval period or whatever, and you cover it up so that the embers continue to smolder, so that when you get up in the morning and you open it up, you can just feed it and it'll grow into a living fire again. That term couvre-feu is where we get our term curfew. So the curfew, and when you have to, I know, right? So when you have to go home at night, it's like it's time to put the lid on the fire. And
yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
Do you want a water story?
Yeah. Do you remember so I had a lot of students really kind of charmed by your last time you told the water story about the frog and the cockroach and
okay, yeah, I could tell that one.
Because there were a lot of students that thought that was really funny. So
I almost completely forgot about that. Yeah. Okay, so this is in the context of water is often broken into two kinds of water: the sweet water or fresh water and salt water. So and there's kind of there's some myths that answer the question, how did water get salty? How did all that water in the ocean get so salty? And that's essentially the question. I'll try to remember this now. So,
there's a cockroach and a wallaby.
There's a cockroach, a wallaby, and a frog.
And a frog.
And a frog. And the wallaby has all of this, this paint to do really cool body paint and face paint and everything, because like and so the wallaby and the cockroach and the wallaby has the cockroach do his, and the wallaby does the cockroaches, and they look really good, and the frog's over there, and the wallaby has his paint, and then also has like a bucket of water, right? Has like a pail of water, because they're going to go on a walk across Australia, a walkabout, and they're about to go, and when the frog says, "Well, are you going to do me?" and the cockroach, does it real quick, and it doesn't look good at all, and the frog, is not happy with it. So the frog goes over and pisses in the water, and that's how it pisses in that water, and so they don't have any fresh water, and then they go to the next fresh water. He pisses in that water, so they don't have any more fresh water, and then that's how the ocean got salty.
That's how the ocean gets salty.
It's not. That's not exactly it. But I only told it once. I don't remember it. It totally slipped my mind. I forgot about that story.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it touches on, first of all, it's charming, and second of all, it touches on the question of why did saltwater and freshwater become different or whatever. They are incredible. The difference is really important. One is the first
sweet water. Like when you hear the name sweet water in English, that's like, and that's really good. They'll translate it sweet water, like life-giving water.
I heard another story associated with frogs, and then I'll let you go back to the one you were going to tell. But this was not even a story. It's just how did sweet water come about? And the story is back in the dream time, there was a big frog, and somebody came up and tickled it, and it laughed. And when it laughed, it released all of the waters for all the people. Yeah.
And that's what happens, right? Have you ever tickled a frog?
Yeah. Well, they
release their water.
They secrete. Yeah, they secrete, don't they?
They do. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that's a good way. I mean, if you can imagine, someone asks you, "Hey, how does that?" Well, you go tickle that frog, and you'll find out.
You'll find out. It's amazing what you can learn by tickling frogs.
Yeah, frogs can. Yeah, you can learn a lot of things.
What story were you going to tell?
Well, I was just all into this Vedic Indian stories, and Agni is the god, the name of fire, and I was reading another story, and it had Indra, and I didn't even want to tell the story. I just wanted to say the verbiage that they talk about. They use this like, where were you, almost biblical language, like, where were you when I created this, and then this was that, but it talks about water, it talks about primordial waters, and it talks about chaos, and it talks about it assumes a worldview that we've tried to explain and that we can't explain, and it's in the Vedic tradition. It comes from the Vedas, the Rig Veda, and it's actually really, it's kind of fun. And so I want to read like two little segments from a story, and we can just talk about that. It talks about water, and it has Indra and chaos dragons and stuff. Okay, so it's Indra, by the way, is the storm god in the Vedic tradition. That is this. It would be the same god for Zeus. Zeus is a storm god. Indra is a storm god.
Yahweh is a storm god.
Yahweh is a storm
Marduk.
god. Baal is
Baal.
Syria is a storm god.
Marduk is.
Marduk is a storm god. That's right, Marduk. This is in fact this sounds a lot like that. So with the chaos dragon and whatnot. So
Yeah.
Indra slew the dragon, a giant titan that had been crouching on the mountains in the limbless shape of a cloud serpent, holding the waters of heaven captive in its belly. The god flung his thunderbolt into the midst of the ungainly coils. The monster shattered like a stack of withered rushes. The waters burst free and streamed in ribbons across the land to circulate once more through the body of the world. Because remember, the world is a body. But we have to keep the prior myth in mind of how it was.
Purusha story, yeah.
This flood is the flood of life and belongs to all. It is the sap of the field and forest, the blood coursing in the veins. The monster had appropriated the common benefit, amassing his ambitious, selfish hulk between heaven and earth, and now was slain. The juices were again pouring. The demons were retreating to the underworld, and the gods were returning to the summit in the central mountain of the earth to reign from on high. And then I just want to read just a little bit of the language. Indra gets confronted by someone who's bigger and badder than him, and it sounds a little bit like God in the whirlwind, and it talks about water. So I'll just read a few sentences.
God in the whirlwind in the book of Job.
In the book of Job, it sounds very like biblical, like, where were you when I, did this and did that? Mhm. I have seen all perish again and again at the end of every cycle. At that terrible time, every single atom dissolves into the primal pure waters of eternity, whence originally all arose. Everything then goes back into the fathomless wild infinity of the ocean, the fathomless wild infinity, which is covered with utter darkness and is empty of every sign of animate being. Oh, who will count the universes that have passed away, or the creations that have arisen afresh again and again from the formless abyss of the vast waters? And who will search through the wide infinities of space to count the universes side by side, each containing its own Brahma, Vishnu, or Shiva? Who will count all the Indras? Anyway, I was reading that, and the way that the way they just talked about that captured so much the worldview of so many ancient cultures, and it talked about water and the primal chaos that water could symbolize, that dissolves everything, that everything dissolves back into, like the chaos in the beginning of the Theogony in the Greek creation story.
Eliade, Mircea Eliade, who is one of the most famous, Joseph Campbell is probably more famous mythologist right now, but Mircea Eliade is more well respected among scholars. But he said that, and his knowledge of world mythology was just, oceanic. But he said that chaos is always, we talked in previous Zooms about the word chaos. In the Greek tradition, it's in the beginning, there was Gaia, earth, Uranus, sky, chaos, and eros. And chaos is absolute nothingness. It's like what the universe
A
was.
yawning chasm is like a yawning gap.
Yeah.
Just sort of an unorganized nothingness. So if you want to know what the opposite of chaos is, the opposite of chaos is the cosmos.
Yeah.
And so, but here's the cool thing that I learned about that word. That's actually the word for jewelry. It's the word cosmetics.
Ornament, yeah.
Because the universe is beautiful in its organization, like a well-made diadem or necklace or something like this. The universe is, they are jewel. It is a jewel.
But it depends on the chaos.
It's beautiful. It is the opposite of chaos. It is beautiful in relation to the amount that it is not chaotic. Sort of.
But it also depends on the chaos, because it comes out of chaos and it sinks back into it, right? Chaos is.
That's just what the Greek word means. I was just referring to the way the Greek, the way they talk about the cosmos. Yeah. That's just the way that that's sort of like the way you can look at the philology of the word and see what they're talking about. But yeah, definitely
cosmos is order and structure and form and all of the world we can see.
And it's beautiful and it's pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, it's cosmetic.
Yeah. And really, I mean, it's the same word. It's the same word.
Yep. And chaos is the void. It's like antimatter or whatever. It's incomprehensible. It's the question, what were you before you were born? And Eliade says that to symbolize that, people use water. Water symbolizes chaos. It's unformed. It's like it's in some ways like eternal in the mythological consciousness. Like all of these stories start with water. In the Bible, in the beginning, the Spirit of God hovered over the water, and God said, "Let there be light." It doesn't say God created water. It was just like first there was God, and God was around water.
Yeah.
We told a Maidu story last week from the Indian tribe here. And their creation story goes, in the beginning, these guys were in a boat and it was really dark. I mean, water is, it's not like God comes along and creates water. God like comes up out of water and then creates stuff out of that.
And, it's weirdly, figuratively, you could talk about it like the womb.
Yeah.
A lot. Like a literally a child baby being created inside of the womb of the mother.
The womb is filled with water, amniotic fluid,
and surrounded by cushy stuff, and they're in the baby. So it's really interesting that these stories, you could be metaphorical for thinking about the arisal of human consciousness. Even in that, like becoming a person.
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about we don't have to talk about the complicated aspects of consciousness. Like when a baby is born, they become a person. They weren't, like you literally, you become conscious, you become a human being, and right? And a lot of these creation stories can kind of, even Garden of Eden or the creation stories, it talks about that. In the Indian ones, it literally, some of them say, it says I, and then therefore, I think of I, and like I, or the I thought I, and then thought was created.
Yeah.
And selfhood, and there seems, and the word self is almost the word for soul is the word self. The word soul is the word for self, and in the Indian tradition, Atman, it can be translated that way. And I was reading the way they were describing the philosophy, and this guy was not talking about the womb, but I was just like, wow, that sounds like the primal thought, which is the will towards selfhood in a consciousness that drifts aimlessly alone in a void. That's the description of these myths. So it's a will towards selfhood in a consciousness that drifts aimlessly alone in a void. It's like summarizes the way these primal creation stories start. Like and they're alone in this way. I mean, that's how that story starts.
So what's funny to me is that the brain is 70% or 80% water. So the brain that comes up with that thought is also floating alone on the water. Oh my gosh, mind blown right there. But for those of you who don't know, our bodies are 70% water, our brains are 80% water. We come to life in amniotic fluid. Life itself.
And water has a relation to oxygen and air. So when you're in a void or a placenta, or when you're in there, babies are it's hypoxic. They have something like a 65% blood oxygen saturation point, where it's normally 95, above 95, or it's an emergency for most people. And so that's what babies come out blue. It's because they came out of an environment that doesn't have a lot of oxygen, and that's the way it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So it's like, in a strange way, it's very closely related to this actual consciousness and water and coming out. Anyway, man, I'm connecting the dots with my red yarn and stuff.
Well, I mean, these are not, no, I mean, we're really not, we're not tinfoil hat here. These connections are real. When you're dealing with something as elemental as water that people have been, I mean, you could go for a long time without food and you find you can't go very long without water. We are birthed in the amniotic fluid of the womb. Our body and brains are mostly water. Life itself evolved in the oceans. That's how it started. And the will to selfhood hovering over the abyss, the development of consciousness, the first thought, I, in the beginning, the Spirit of God hovered over the water. Well, also in our own isolated brains that are 80% water, there's the I hovering over the water of our physical brain.
And it's like right here somewhere.
Yeah, it's like
over here. It's more over here.
Yeah,
People get hit in the head and they lose their eye.
yeah,
They lose
right.
that part of they really do. So you kind of like, you're sort of saying, really though. I mean, yeah. So Jason, I think that this isn't a change of subject, but I think it's something now that we've run out of time to bring up so that we don't have any time. I think
we still have another half hour. I have scheduled till 6:30.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, right, good. We should, and I think that this is really important in general in a mythology course or a course on the ancient world, to talk about I said the elements earlier, but the elements, the humors, and the astronomy, the astrological science, because we sort of we're dancing around it all the time. When you tell the story about a constellation or a Greek myth, or we're talking about fire and we're talking about water, and we're talking about the earth and we're talking about this, it's we're these people actually, there's a worldview that, just like explaining that they thought they lived on a disc and then there was a dome and it separated the waters and then there's the air, and like explaining that's important when you read something, and that it changes, that worldview changes over time, and you have to know which worldview the people are assuming when you're reading their texts or you're listening to their stories. But it's essentially it's weirdly, it's just like the elements, but also astrology, like astronomy, ancient astronomy, tied in with the Greek gods, the planets, and the elements, and it's fire, water, earth, air, ether, or if you're in China, there's it's actually not elements, it's processes, or it's
yin yang.
Well, there's 5 elements. There's for the 5 planets, there are 5 processes or phases, which are like the elements, and I think it's like wood, water, earth, metal, and I'm missing. What am I missing? Something obvious. But they have a whole system and everything like that too. But it's weirdly tied into this, to the constellations and seasons and planting and the order of society and the way religion happens, at the way they view the human body and psychology, like Galen's medicine, Greek medicine, Islamic medicine. Today, they have, what is it called? Ayurveda medicine is still today.
Ayurveda,
how do you say it?
Ayurveda.
Ayurveda. That's the tradition I'm talking about. It's the same tradition of these earth, of the 4 elements or the 5 elements, and
that way of thinking only disappeared in Western Europe. Really, it's still around, but it really kind of only disappeared in Western Europe in the 19th century. Even Newton and like these great rational, icons of Western rational thinking, believed in the influence of astral bodies on the earth. In fact, when Newton proposed his theory of gravity, he was like giving a name to a sense that people had that heavenly bodies had physical impact on the happening on earth. And there was a strong connection between Newton and astrology, and that we're not independent, that the stars and the heavenly bodies affect us. Last week we talked about the moon and how the moon affects women's menstrual cycles, and that is, documented all over the world in the menstrual rituals of tribes, everywhere. But during the full moon, there's all the hospital, help desk and police officers are on, high alert during full moon, because people can't sleep and it kind of makes them a little bit lunatic. And we have to subtract. There's so much that we have to forget in order to understand the worldview of these ancient people. And like you're saying, it comes down to the humors, the basic elements, and how they interact with one another and how we understand those interactions.
And it works all the way up to the celestial. So you have to believe that the celestial bodies have an influence on the world. And you, in a way, and you may say, quote the Bible, like, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide day from night, and let there be signs, let them be signs for seasons, for days, and for years. And then here's another one, reinterpret this. Think about this from an astronomy point of view, or from the point of view we're talking about. To everything there is a season and a time, to everything a purpose under the heaven. To every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which was planted. Ecclesiastes. So planting by the stars is a real thing, and planting by the moon is a real thing. It's called the Farmer's Almanac. And you can get it. And you can plant by the constellations and by the moon, and it is all to this day. Like, so, it used to be practiced by like everybody. Like George Washington did this when he was on Mount Vernon or whatever. And it strangely goes all the way back to the four elements, the way they viewed, and to the stars. So for instance, just the way it works is every day of the month, there is a constellation that's like in a certain area of the sky. And those constellations are signs like Sagittarius, Aquarius, whatever. And they were assigned values. Like I'll just like look at the list. So the fire is Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, right? Earth is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Air is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And so literally,
What's water?
Water, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And and it gets really complicated. And it's like what culture and what time and what are you talking about? I mean, but it comes down to, so if you think about that, so fire, earth, air, and water, and they have these different, and then you have the planets, Jupiter and Saturn, which are gods, are in fire. The moon and Mars are in earth. Mercury and Jupiter are air. And once again, Mars and the moon are water. So, and this is Greek, right? So, but it's very, very, very similar in the Vedic traditions. And so there's one more thing. So there's 4 or 5 elements because you add a later one at the end called ether, which is kind of like upper space or atmosphere or something.
Quintessence.
Or phantasms, or
it's the quintessential element.
Yeah, the fifth essence, which is space. And in the Indian tradition, they have every earth, water, air, fire, and space as well. But the humors are interesting too, because it's the way there's 4 humors, and that is when you hear someone say, let me see, it's the way that the ancient people used to think that like you would get sick and the way you would feel. It's the way they used to think biology worked before like real medicine. You just ancient medicine. And so you had these 4 fluids that were made and balanced in your body. So if you are melancholic, like if you're melancholy, that's black bile, and it's from the word for black in Greek. And it comes from your spleen, okay? And when you have too much black bile, of course, you're depressed and you're pensive and all that stuff. It's also connected with old age, the season of winter, and the element of earth. So that's important. And the planet Saturn. So remember that. So I'll just go through the other ones. There's the caloric one, which is blood or fire. And that's yellow bile. Phlegmatic, which is water. Sanguine, which is blood. Caloric, which is yellow bile. So they would use these 4 humors and the 4 elements and then associate traits to each of them to tell you when to do things and what was a good, like a propitious day to do that and a propitious day to do this, to literally like when you should plant or not, or when you should do this.
And the outcome of all this thinking is balance, right? The idea is to maintain a cosmic, the correct proportions within the cosmos. And one of the interesting things about water is that in all of these stories, water is at the beginning, but water comes at the end in its destructive form too. And so when things get so far out of balance, the Hopi word is koyanistasi, when things are incapable of going back into their proper balance, a flood is sent to wipe everything clean, and out of that new order to arise. There's an Aztec story that's that I really like. I don't think I can pronounce the goddess's name. Maybe one of the students here knows this story too, but I think her name is Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was the goddess in charge of the 4th world. And it just went to shit. All the people were just, a bunch of idiots and, just conspiracy theorists, morons, just not dealing with reality in their own thought processes. And she just got sick of it. So she sent a flood first of all, she took out all the people she liked, all the decent, people, and she put them into the fifth world. And she destroyed the fourth world with water and turned them all into fish. All the idiots she turned back into fish. And then she made a bridge into the fifth world. And the fifth world is our world. And our world, we're the ones that she liked. But we run the same danger of just going so far off into left field that we're going to piss her off again, and she may send that flood to destroy us again. And that's the same sense that you get in the Noah story from the Bible, that we have it within us, and people from all cultures, the Aztecs knew it, the ancient Hebrews knew it. I mean, it's just look around. Human beings have the capacity within us to fuck everything completely all to hell, and like, just pardon me for the F word, but I mean, really though, just screw everything up. And what happens when we do that? Well, the universe destroys and then recreates. And the agency, one of the agencies for which that happens is through water, which has a creative, generative function and also a destructive one. Does anybody in the class know that story of the fifth world from the Aztec tradition?
I thought it was Hopi. It must. There was a Hopi version that's very similar. The Spider Woman and immersion out of the fourth world into the fifth world. I think it's even
It's
like
also, Mesoamerican. It's probably all very, very.
Yeah, probably related. And it's like a solar myth somehow. I don't remember it exactly. I remember reading it.
Yeah, there's something about the sun in there too. Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, and then we'll take questions from the class. So if you guys have any questions or comments, we'll devote the last 15 minutes of the class to that. And if you guys don't have any, we'll just end it. But one of the things I did want to talk about is there is a natural history explanation for all the flood mythologies around the world. And that is that there's lots of places on Earth where there's seashells in the rocks. And if you walk around, you see like aquatic shells, like way up in the mountains and stuff. And if you don't have a modern, I mean, we know, modern science knows that there's a thing called plate tectonics, where you have this plate here and you have this plate here, and this one's underwater or whatever, and when they meet, this plate goes underneath and this one rises up to become mountains, and all of the shells that were used to be on the bottom of the ocean, they're fossilized and they rise up. So later on in time, you could walk up and you could see seashells up there. And we know Xenophanes, I believe it was Xenophanes, the ancient Greek philosopher, said that that's evidence of a flood, that God got really mad with people and sent a flood, and that's why all the seashells are up there. And so there is actually a kind of a commonsensical way of understanding why these flood stories are found all over the world. It's by people walking around and seeing seashells. I remember you said where you live in Santa Barbara, you could walk around and see seashells. Right.
I literally, they're all over the retaining walls they made in the 1930s, and they used some of those in the stone. So it's like I have that in like the little like walkways around my house.
Yeah, because you're right on the coast, and you're right where the subduction zone.
I can be able to show you.
You're gonna go grab some. But this is one way of explaining why these flood myths are found all over the world, is because you can see these seashells everywhere. Sam's going to go find some in front of his front yard. But I think most of us have had that experience, walking around and seeing seashells in places where there shouldn't be any seashells. Did you find one? Oh, you were closing the door.
It's like concreted into the wall. I'd have to like just take the computer, but it's dark, so it just looked like a rock. Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and there really are a lot of floods in a lot of different places.
And there are actual floods. Yeah.
A lot of these places with flood mythologies have floods.
The Nile, the Mesopotamia.
In China, the mythology around China is always
Yep.
about
Yep.
the original emperor keeping the dikes up so that flooding doesn't destroy the country.
Yep.
And we see it happening. I think it didn't happen this last year. Wasn't flooding really terrible in China last couple of years?
Maybe I didn't hear
I
about
mean,
that.
it's still an issue that they have to maintain. They have to make sure that the infrastructure works, to this day.
And water is powerful. When it rains really hard here, I've got the Auburn Ravine Creek in my backyard. But when it rains really hard here, that water gets going and it's not safe. I mean, for real, it's not safe. For adult good swimmers, if you get caught up in a slide, I mean, see ya. That's it, man. Water is very, very, very powerful.
The Code of Hammurabi, one of the original law codes written down in Mesopotamia. What it would say, if you do this, dumbass, this is what's going to happen to you. And a lot of this is what's going to happen to you is you will be your innocence will be tested by the river. So they throw you into the river, and if you don't die, you made it. You're good. You're innocent. So
that reminds me of that witch. That reminds me of the witch ritual in Europe, to where if somebody thought they were a witch, they'd throw you in the water, and if you drowned, you were innocent.
Wow.
If you survived, they'd burn you.
As I went
So fire and water, two of the four elements, some of the basic humor, some of the basic organizing principles of our creation, which in pre-modern times were the only, distinct recognizable elements that people had to work with in terms of their medicine and planting and, all these sorts of things.
Makes sense too that they would go, well, why kind of the same ones, it seems like. Pretty much. I mean, in China, it's different. It's not quite the same thing. It's not a good comparison, but it's because like in your stories, you always seem to have fire and water together, and you always seem to have earth and air in the
sun and moon. And
yeah, sun and the moon is always seems to be associated with waters as well. Too.
Yeah.
It's but the thing is in these cultures, these people believe and thought that the celestial bodies interacted with their bodies and their lives in a way that we believe in physics, that we believe in gravity. It's not like it wasn't like a faith question. Well, I mean, maybe it was a little bit. You could say I don't believe in gravity, but and when they really did think that I could find the right day to plant beans by using the stars, and if you're Avicenna. Like medicine up until microscopes and 1900s was a balancing of the humors. That's what bloodletting was about. And it was all throughout. It goes from Greek culture to Arabic culture. It's also an Indian culture, and it goes from Arabic culture back into European culture. And alchemy is an outpouring of this. Alchemy, like you were talking about, Newton was an alchemist.
Okay, good. So I want to see if there's any questions for the last 10, 15 minutes or so about any of the things we've been talking about fire and water and world mythology, or your own comments or whatever. And like I said, if there's not, we'll just end it. But if there is, I wanted to hear from you. So, Doi, do you have any thoughts or comments?
Oh, I just find it interesting that with the discussion on the planets and everything, of the stars. I mean, I get the whole bit with using the moon and the stars for planting, because if you're tracking the stars, as Stonehenge and all those things, you know when it's going to be the solar equinox and blah 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 blah. But I don't track how that becomes one of influencing how we are as people, and that's the part that always escaped me.
Yeah, let's hold off on that, because we really kind of want to maintain a focus on fire and water, and maybe we can come back to that when we start talking about the hero's journey, because there's probably lots of ways in which myths connect astral phenomenon and the physiological influences of creation on parts of the hero's journey.
Okay.
Cassie, did you have any questions? Or I know I signaled you out, but I was so charmed by that story you told last week. I want to see if you have anything to say.
I don't think I necessarily have anything to say, although I was reading the discussion posts and the discussion board, and something that I noticed and that I think somebody pointed out in one of their comments was that quite a few of the fire myths were connected to birds or like animals of flight. And my personal story was connected to that as well. Mine was about a hawk shapeshifter. But I thought that was interesting, and I was wondering if there was any reason for that at all.
I don't have anything. This is where I would turn to Sam. Sam, does that ring any of your bells?
I mean, I could start coming up with theories.
Yeah.
What? So
So
I mean, I can. The cultures have these stories. Like if you talk about the Indo-European one, the bird mythology is associated with the high god, the storm god Zeus, and eagles and things like that. And with fire, and you were talking about flight and fire. I have no idea.
well, also flames go up, and embers from flames go up. There's an upward motion of fire.
Air, fire. I mean, ether is space, and then you have air, then you have fire, then you have water and earth. You know, so I
also thunderbirds, which are found in both Slavic and in indigenous American mythologies. So yeah,
there's different kinds of fire. There's fire in the sky, which is lightning.
Yep, lightning.
That's sky fire from these same traditions. Like Indra has sky fire basically because he uses lightning.
Chloe, do you have any questions or comments or anything?
No, but I did really enjoy all the stories we heard.
Okay, good. Lauren?
Nope, I've just been enjoying the discussion.
Okay, fine. Lisa?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, and I'll save the best for last. Alexis, you have anything? Any questions or comments or anything?
There we go. No, I don't think so. Actually, I do. Earlier, Sam was talking about like the different like types of fire, how there's like a warrior fire and then there's like an earthly fire. I think I'm something like that. I was driving in the car, but I wanted to know, is there like a human, like inward human fire, like within us per se?
So that's, I mean, the person that created fire sort of is you. So right, that's what we're hinting at. What I was talking about is it's a sociological thing within Indian culture, is that they have multiple layers of their society. One's the priests, the warriors, and then like the merchants or the producers. And then there's like a sacrificial fire. There's a defensive fire, like you have a fire around, and then there's a cooking fire. But those fires all they use them as a way to sort of justify the structure of their own society and tie it in with their religion and the myths and everything like that.
I have a comment on that too, and it's connected to Sam's, although it's from a slightly different point of view. I mean, Indian culture is, there's a lot, but there's a tradition in Vedic, ancient Indian culture where there's three kinds of fire. One is the fire on the earth, and the other one is air fire, which is lightning, and the third is the sun fire, which is the sun. And so there's three levels of fire: fire on earth, fire in the heavens, and fire in the sun. And that's the old Vedic way of thinking. The Upanishads, which were written in the Axial Age about 500 BC, and kind of in response to the Vedic way of thinking, internalized that. They said those three fires are inner fires. And there's like a base fire, and there's a mid-level fire, and there's the high fire of consciousness or whatever. And so you do see a kind of a philosophical interpretation of that as Indian philosophy begins to take hold about the year 500 BC. And it does become one of ways by which the philosophers of the Upanishads explain consciousness and higher forms of consciousness and lower forms of consciousness.
It's hinted at it in this myth in the very beginning. Since he preceding all burned up all evils, he is the Purusha. He who knows this burns up anyone who would precede him. So there are several sections in this myth where it says, whoever knows this, whoever knows this, whoever knows this. So it states the ultimate creator, first person Atman did this thing. And whoever realizes this is Atman, it becomes that. And so in a way, the myth itself is saying, and I think this is like a later Upanishad sort of
it sounds like it. Yeah.
To put into it in the final form, that if you learn these truths in this weird sort of metaphorical way from the story, then you will become that. And it talks about fires. I don't know. I mean, so it kind of, the cool thing about the Indian tradition is it really, you yourself always have a personal individual journey that you can kind of go on, and it's cool. I don't know.
And to close up shop, and thank you all for coming, but I'll close up with one last bit, and it connects to Alexis's question. In the Bible, when Moses is in the desert, he comes across a burning bush. The bush is in the flames of the burning bush. In the book of Exodus in the Bible, God reveals to Moses for the first time his true name. It's through the fire that God communicates to Moses his real identity. And from that, Moses delivers the people to freedom and creates the state of Israel, and the whole entire religion of Judaism is born. So it's born in the truth of Judaism is born in the flame of the bush in the desert. So something to think about. All right, y'all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here.